A webinar with slides. Presenter in top right corner of the screen. On-screen text. November 7, 2024. 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time or 1 p.m. to 2:30 Eastern Time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Equipping Systems to Support American Indian and Alaska Native Families Affected by Substance Use. And I would like to now introduce today's speakers with you all. Presenting today are Courtney Yarbuller, LMSW, who is the founder and CEO of Evergreen Training and Development and an enrolled member of the Sac and Fox Nation, as well as descendant of the Muskogee Creek, Pawnee, and Oto tribes. And also presenting today is Sean Couch, Senior Program Associate for the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare, who has over 18 years of experience working with communities, states, and tribes in the mental health and substance use service field. Mr. Couch is also a direct descendant of the Choctaw Freedmen and is passionate about seeing systems collaborate to improve outcomes for families affected by mental health and substance use challenges.
Headshot photos of the smiling Courtney Yarbuller and Sean Couch.
I'm going to pass this over now to Sean to get us started. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much. So, man, again, just want to say welcome to everybody that's taking time out of their very, very busy schedule to figure out how do we come together and how do systems collaborate with tribes in a meaningful way to improve outcomes for American Indian and Alaska Native families that are affected by substance use. So what we want to do is we just want to get the conversation going with a couple of opening questions. So what you're going to see in the chat right now, there's going to be a link to a platform that we love to use called Mentimeter. And so if you will do me a favor, and if you will click on that link, it's going to take you to a platform to really, again, help us open the discussions for today. And so the first thing that we would like to do, and we just want to know, where are you located at right now? So you have the capability to pin where you're located. So please note the community, the state, man, the geographic location of your tribal nation, as well as maybe you're attending from another country as well. Feel free, if that's you, to drop a pin maybe on the left or the right side of the map that you see before you as well.
An interactive map of the United States. Join at monty.com. Use code 9738-9002. Blue dots fill the map.
And so I love, just as you can see in real time, man, we have hundreds of people across this entire nation and even from outside of our nation that are coming together to figure out how do we support AI families affected by substance use. You know, I really want to point out, again, as you can see, we have multiple people from across multiple geographic areas that are participating, be they local communities, be they states, be they sovereign tribal nations. You know, I love seeing, and we have such as the Lummi Nation, the Navajo Nation, Cherokee, Choctaw, Delaware, Shinnecock, man. We have federal partners from the Indian Health Services, the Children's Bureau, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And we just have so many partners that I love that are just expressing interest in figuring out how do we come together and collaborate to improve outcomes for AIAN families that are affected by substance use. And so the next question that I would like to pose to you is just kind of, what is your experience right now when it comes to serving American Indian and Alaska Native families that are affected by substance use? And you have the ability on this scale here, maybe you don't have any experience, but you're figuring out, you know, what are the resources and supports that I need? Maybe as a child welfare system representative or healthcare professional or a member of a tribal nation, you know, how do I learn more and gain more experience in this space?
An interactive sliding scale from no experience at the far left to very experienced at the far right. A blue dot grows in size and slides back and forth as participants answer.
So as you can see, the from those that are participating today, really there are some with a significant amount of experience, but then there are some that are coming to the table with maybe a little experience and wanting to figure out, like, what tools, what resources are available to help me and to equip myself, to equip my system to effectively partner with tribal nations to improve outcomes for families. So I appreciate you participating in that question. And then the next question that I want to pose to you is, in the work that you're doing, and some have a significant amount of experience, some maybe this is their initial foray in this space, but what are some of the policy or practice challenges that you've seen in your experience when it comes to serving AI and AN families affected by substance use? So feel free, go ahead, just in a couple of words, put kind of what are some of the challenges that you may be facing, maybe as a tribal nation collaborating with state child welfare systems, or maybe healthcare providers figuring out.
Words and phrases pop up on the screen.
So I love that we have some mentioned here, like building trust. Man, that's a key one. How do we build trust and create and identify those common values and common beliefs that can move the conversation forward? Some mention funding. Funding is always one of those issues that likes to raise its head and figure out, man, how do we gain access to additional funding? How do we leverage the funding that we currently have? And maybe how do we braid funding across systems, and how do we partner with tribal nations from a funding perspective to leverage those resources to support and improve outcomes for families, for AIA and families affected by substance use? And so again, I appreciate your participation in this. Some mentioned wait lists, lack of cultural practices. And that's something we're going to speak to today as well. Some mentioned the distance. Some mentioned housing issues as well, lack of trauma-informed care. So again, our goal during our session today is to hopefully speak to some of these policy and practice challenges that you may be experiencing, and to give you resources and supports to help really move the ball forward in this space. So I do appreciate you participating in these initial questions, and I hope that you also see that that the challenges from a policy and practice level that you may be experiencing, man, there are other systems across this nation that are experiencing the same thing. Maybe there are other tribal nations that are experiencing it as well. So I really hope that you see that commonality that exists between some of the policy or practice that you may be facing as you seek to improve outcomes for AI and AN families affected by substance use. And so what I would like to do next is I want to turn it over to my colleague Courtney to really ground us in a cultural opening as we create this space to have this very unique and very timely conversation today. So Courtney, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean. I want to thank all of you for joining this morning, this afternoon, whatever time zone you may be joining from. I see that we have a lot of folks joining from all over the United States, and what in Indian country we say Turtle Island, and so we see a lot of folks joining from all over, and also was enjoyed watching your responses to the questions, and see that there's a wide variety of experiences and strengths, and that hope of wanting to do better and to learn and to support one another is that thread that brings us all together. So I want to thank you all for participating and joining today. As this is just one conversation, one point in the larger conversation, one point in our learning journey, one point in our healing journey that we have opportunity to share together. My name is Courtney Yarholer, as it was presented in my introduction, and I am Sac and Fox. I'm a tribal citizen of the Sac and Fox Nation of Oklahoma, as well as Muskogee Creek. My last name is Muskogee Creek, and my family, as well as the Pawnee and the Oto descent. We reside in Oklahoma, and the origins of those tribes, they all relocated from other places across the United States, across Turtle Island, many years ago, many generations ago. And so that's a part of the story. That's a part of who we are and what makes us and brought us to where we are today. I'm also a father. I'm also a husband, a son, a grandson, and a community member within our tribal communities. And I've been blessed to do this kinds of work for for close to 20 years now, all across Indian country, all across Turtle Island, working with our tribal communities in various capacities, and wherever I can to be of support. And so very humbled by this journey, and again, glad to be here with you today. So anytime, what I've learned through those experiences of working and traveling and engaging and being a guest at many of our tribal homes and tribal communities, is we always, our tribal people always begin in a good way, and that comes from not only introductions, but in pausing for moments of prayer, moments of silence, moments of song. And we realize and understand that the songs and the gestures that you find across many of the indigenous nations, they're prayerful in nature. And so we like to start and begin our session in such a way, because we know when we begin in a grounded way, and that's what these openings are for. Prayers and songs, and the prayer songs, they're to ground us and to bring us all together, and to acknowledge that, hey, there's some relationship here, and that we're all connected. And so we're going to do that today, bring that practice into our virtual space here. And it can be done in many different ways. And so what we'd like to do today is I'd like to offer a poem for you all. And this is written by Joy Harjo, Miss Joy Harjo. She's the 23rd United States Poet Laureate, and she's also the first Native American to hold this honor. And this is a poem that resonates, and I feel is very timely. And so I want to share it with you. Remember the sky that you are born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind. Remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember, you are all people, and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. Remember, all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember, language comes from this. Remember, the dance language is that life is. Remember. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with us. That is a poem, is again from Miss Joy Harjo. It's entitled Remember. And I think it's a fitting and a reminder that that we're all connected to all things, to all living things, all creation, all of creation. And we are a part of it. We are just as important as other living creations. And with that relationship, with those connections, we have to move together in a good way, in a kind-hearted way, being kind, being patient, and having grace with one another. So thank you for bearing with us as we offer that as our cultural opening for today. And and along with that, to accompany this welcoming, if you will, is wanted to go over some group norms, or maybe some agreements of how we can use this space, how we can be in meeting together today. Here's a few things that I'd like to offer. Questions are encouraged. Questions are encouraged. This is a conversation. We want to learn. We want to grow together, learn from one another, and again, in relationship, and to remember that we're in relationship. questions are encouraged. That's how we grow together. Also want to ask that you participate at your comfort level. I'm not going to ask anything more of you, but we want to ask that you take healthy risks, but again, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, emotionally, physically. If you need to get up and stretch, take a bio break, drink water. Water is very healing. Water is in every living thing. And so we need to replenish ourselves and hydrate. And so please remember to do so. So take care of yourself. And also mentally and emotionally take care of yourself. Also, we offer the practice of having self-grace. Have self-grace with yourself. Where some of us as helpers, we practice forgiveness and overlooking of others in a non-judgmental way, and we're really great about it. But then sometimes we fall short when it comes to ourselves. So I invite you, a practice that I've been working on is having self-grace and acknowledging I'm still growing, I'm still learning, we're still growing together. So please, I invite you to have self-grace as we have these kinds of discussions. And for our safety, we will be discussing some very challenging issues, very real truths of our history. And we are going to stay at a high level, but yet they have a lot of deep rooted implications. And so we offer the 988 Lifeline as a resource. And I'm sure there's other ways, whatever ways that you have to take care of yourself, practice that self-care, self-grace, please do so, especially if we need it when we have these difficult conversations or these brave conversations. And so with that, that is our group norms for today. Is questions are encouraged, participate at your comfort level, take care of yourself, have self-grace, and there's the 988 Lifeline. Also, as questions are encouraged, I think it was covered that we're going to use the chat box and the Q&A. And so we will definitely, please use those. They're available to you.
Painting of 3 buffalo running with teeth bared. Lightning and dark clouds in the sky above them. On-screen text. Charging the storm.
So I always like to share this story. Again, I mentioned that we're going to be having some brave conversation, talking about some challenging things and some challenging truths. And when we look at our indigenous people, our tribes across the lands, they have different stories that they learn, that they learn from nature. They learn from our relatives around us, being in relation to understanding the lands that they come from, the waters that they come from, the lands and waters that sustained them for thousands of years. Teachings come from those lands, comes from those surroundings, those environments. And so one teaching I like to share is the teaching of the buffalo. They say the relative to our buffalo, our relative, the buffalo. When there's on the prairie, when there's a storm coming, they're huge, huge storms. You see them come rolling in, and they can be very intimidating. So whereas other animals, other herd animals may run and scatter, may group together and go hide, whatever it might be, however they ride out the storm, the buffalo, it was observed and learned from our relatives, the buffalo, they come together. They come together and they charge that storm because they know that there's calm on the other side. And so they come together as a group and they support one another as they go through this storm and have this bravery. And so that's what we're asking today as we address and confront some of these historical truths, that we come together as a group, as a collective voice, as a collective unit, as collective relatives, knowing that there's calm on the other side. And that's where we're leading. That's where we're going. And so together we can get there. So again, I invite you to have that self-grace and patience with one another and be kind. So thank you for that intro.
Awesome. And Courtney, thank you so much just for grounding us and preparing us for the conversation that we're going to have today. That is both meaningful. I think it's intentional that we create this shared space and that we honor each other as we have these brave conversations. And so what I've said before is really the agenda for our conversation today is we want to take time to really unpack some of the historical practices that are affecting American Indian and Alaska Native families. And then also to be able to dive in and discuss some of the practices and supports that are there to really assist with tribal healing. And then we're also excited to unveil and to speak about some new tools that the National Center on Substance Use and Child Welfare have created in partnership with multiple tribal organizations and other partners to really support systems that are serving AIA and families that are affected by substance use. And then, as Courtney was saying, we want this to be a conversation. So we're going to have some time for dialogue, for question and answer. So I encourage you to lean into that piece as well. And then we're going to end it with a conversation around takeaways, really having and processing what is it that we're giving to this conversation, but then also what are those things, those practices, those supports, maybe those nuggets of truth that we're going to take away and use within our practice, within our tribal nation, within our child welfare systems, healthcare systems, to collaborate in a meaningful way to help improve outcomes for families. And then, like said earlier, is we're also going to give an opportunity. We want to hear your feedback during this conversation, but we also want to create space afterwards for an evaluation. So we're going to have that as well. What you see before you now, some learning objectives. What are some of the things that we're looking to accomplish? Is we really hope to provide you with information on those historic policies and practices that were aimed at separating AIA and families, and then to learn more about ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, and really looking at the idea, looking at a tool that speaks to the idea of active efforts through the lens of what we call the 5 points of intervention, which you're going to hear about later. And then again, one of the goals is for us to provide you with tools that have been developed in a collaborative fashion with tribal organizations to help improve outcomes for families, for AIA and families that are affected by substance use. And so with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Courtney to begin our discussion around the effects of trauma.
Thank you so much, Sean. You know, I was thinking about this as you were talking and speaking, and these are very, you know, you mentioned the truths. And so there's some historical truths that we're going to be talking about. There's some present day truths that may arise that we may discuss and identify. And I'm thinking, you know, I had just a quick self-reflection that there's a lot of amazing people that do this kinds of work and that can speak more eloquently than I. But I'm very honored and humbled to be a part of this conversation today. And so, you know, I offer that to each and every one of you, that if this is a new space that you're entering in, it can be intimidating, and we'll just go ahead and say it, you know. However, again, having that self-grace and being intentional and trying your best in learning and continuing to move forward, that's what's appreciated, and that I see within our tribal communities. And I always even have to remind myself of that as well, because we're talking about experiences that our families experience and go through. So again, the effects of trauma and the inequitable outcomes for American and Alaska Native families is what we're going to be talking about today, kind of setting the context. We recognize that history does, you know, of course, it plays a role in who we are today, especially that trauma history. But history definitely does play a role in who we are today. I took this picture of the redwood trees, and on a trip with my family out to the redwoods a couple of years ago, and you know, it's so profound. If you ever have an opportunity to go visit the redwood forest, and you see the strength and the knowledge and the wisdom and the roots, if you can even just imagine the roots that are there and how this forest supports one another, these trees, the magnitude of them. And so, you know, the history that they could tell, you know, it's just beyond my comprehension. But I wanted to use that as a representation that history plays an important role in who we are today. And there's a lot of strength. There's a lot of deep roots in our history, in our collective history, and in the history of our American and Alaska Native people. And so I offer that to introduce this section. And we're going to talk about some of the strengths that we find within our tribal communities and those deep roots that I had mentioned. But we also have to acknowledge that the challenges, right? Those strong winds that those trees have had to endure over the many years, and other weather conditions or whatever they may have encountered, right? And so when we think about that, there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of challenge that goes along with that strength. And so when we look at that, and we look at this historical trauma timeline, I offer this. It's there's trainings and there's discussions that we can have with regards to historical trauma. This is just a high level overview of major policies within the United States that have had major impact on American Indian, Alaska Native families, individuals and families. And you can see starting back, and even, there's even traumatic events prior to these. However, these are the ones that are documented that were United States policy. So we look at the reservation periods from 1865, beginning in 1865, on to 1875. And then we see how that also leads into different periods of the 1800s, where the Native American and Religious Acts were made illegal. So then you acknowledge and you recognize all these different aspects of this historical trauma timeline. They capture these big ideas that had a collective push to oppress a group of people. And we think about the reservation period. What is that? That's the removing of land, or removing people from land, their original homelands. And again, how we started off understanding this value of connection and relationship to that land. So it's devastating. That was a devastating point in history. Native American Religious Acts made illegal. So understanding that, wow, now we're getting into an era where it's illegal to even practice our faith, right? When you think about it as a people, you're practicing your faith. Those acts have been made illegal, and very serious repercussions were felt if you were caught practicing your faith in those traditional ways. 1878, the boarding school establishment. So beginning that boarding school era in 1878. Again, that was an idea, that was a collective idea where we take children away from their families. From not only did we take the families away from their land and forbid them from using their faith-based practices, but also now we begin to take the children away. We take the children away because that's how we begin to take the spirit away from a people as you take their children. And so that was the establishment of the boarding school era. Then we also have the general allotment period, 1887, beginning in 1887. And that's where, again, looking at land, looking at resources, and acknowledging and recognizing that, wow, there's a lot there to unpack, but recognizing that this was a land grab. This was when we're trying to move people from land, because those were needed resources for the development of this vision for America. And so again, it all aligns with that vision. And then the termination era, we jump to the 1953, the termination era. And so by then we have all these various tribes, and I didn't even set it up, but there were thousands, there was a lot of tribes. Today we have over 500 federally recognized tribes. There were many more tribal nations before this time, and but many of these tribal nations were surviving through these different eras on this historical trauma timeline. When it got to the termination era of 1953, that's when the federal government just began to take a black magic marker and started crossing through and saying, you're no longer, we're no longer recognizing you as a federally recognized tribe. Those original treaties that were made no longer apply. And we also acknowledge and understand that these are just big highlights of different eras. But the agreements or the treaties, the original treaties that were made, they were broken. They were broken throughout all of these eras in many different ways, and they affected the tribes and the tribal nations in many different ways. Again, this is just a big, broad snapshot. We move into relocation. You see, I want to note that the dates here are very recent. 1953. That doesn't sound very long ago. That doesn't feel like that was very long ago. My parents were alive during this era, right? Then we look in 1970, the boarding schools. As we knew them, those treacherous boarding schools began to come to an end in the 1970s. That was the decade that I was born, so it was definitely not very long ago. Then we see the rise in activism and in self-determination and self-governance, and we see that today.
Sources: Merriam Report, The Problem of Indian Administration, open brace 1928 close brace. First full general study to assess the conditions on reservations and Indian boarding schools. Carlisle Boarding School, open brace 1879 close brace. Kill the Indian and Save the Man, open brace General Pratt close brace.
But again, these are big, broad timestamps and areas that are part of this historical trauma timeline. And I want to thank my one of my colleagues and sister that I call a sister. Known her for many years. Her name is Carol Colmenero. She put this slide together, and we can sit here and we can unpack this slide all day long. But what the takeaway is that there's been systematic policies negatively impacting and chipping away and trying to policies of genocide and policies of trying to eradicate a people and the indigenous people. I encourage you to the tribe that you are, the tribe, maybe you're a non-tribal partner, and I encourage you to go and learn about the tribes in your area, in your state, in your region, and learn about their histories. Learn how these historical events and moments in time have impacted them, because it impacted collectively, but also we go through the storms differently, right? And so I encourage you to go learn more. That's what this is. This is an invitation to go learn. And so then collectively, when we look at those impacts of historical trauma, what the term that we use, we learn, I must also mention historical trauma, the term coined by Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, coined this term of historical trauma as an opportunity for American Indian people to learn how we got to where we are, and to acknowledge that these traumatic events that happen one after another, and sometimes hit like a wave, and before you get a chance to even recover, you get hit by another wave, and that happened for generation upon generation. And the intent, as I understand it from Dr. Marie Yellowhorse Braveheart, is so that we can begin to understand how we got where we are, and we can address some of that grief, begin to understand and heal from some of that unresolved grief, because we had never had a chance to heal. And so that's where the term historical trauma comes from. But when we look at historical trauma and we look at that collective impact, here's a small list, and we can go on and on. But again, these are big, broad topics. Tribal customary healing practices were outlawed. Yeah, we talked about that. Faith-based, practicing our faith, practicing your way of life and understanding of existence within this universe and nature. Not allowed to do that. It was illegal. Boarding schools, the impact of boarding schools. Negative, very negative, very, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but very traumatizing for our children taken away from homes as young as 5, maybe younger in some places. And there's been a lot of reports lately coming out around the impacts of Indian boarding schools. And so there's actually going to be some resources that we're sharing where you can look into it a little bit more. American Indian Alaska Native women forced sterilization or without their consent. So again, those practices took place. Those practices took place, and not even a long time ago, but also very recently. When we look at these dates in the 1950s, 1970s, we see that those acts still took place. And again, this idea of removing American Indian Alaska Native children, the misuse of data and research. So how do we help, right? As we collect data, we assess the situation. Well, if that data is skewed, if that data is misrepresented, if there is no data, then it becomes very challenging to put plans and solutions together. So these are systematic approaches, right? Disruption of cultural transmission, not parents and generations not feeling safe where they can learn and continue on their culture and teach their cultural language and songs and understandings to their children out of fear of the repercussions, because they love their children. They don't want them to get hurt. So disrupting that cultural transmission, and then the intergenerational trauma effects, again, the person's mentality, spiritually, emotionally, socially, as well as their physiological being and behavior. So again, these are just real big, broad. I'm just covering them really quick, going through. And but I encourage you to learn more, to investigate, to learn about the tribes and their histories, and the tribes that you work with, the tribes that you are in their area and on their land, on their traditional homelands, and find out and learn about them and ask questions and listen. So we actually will be sending out additional resources where you can dive in more around historical trauma and understanding historical trauma. I believe we have some links to works of Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, and then the coalition for the Indian Boarding School Healing Coalition. They have some great resources available to help with our education and our understanding. And
Healing and Recognizing Historical Trauma. Black and white photo of American Indian children walking in a line along a sidewalk in front of a multi-story brick boarding school. The girls wear white shirts and skirts. The boys wear white shirts and dark pants.
You know, one of the challenges that I've run across and that people have expressed with me is this idea, or not this idea, but this feeling of guilt when we talk about these historical truths. And what I invite in these spaces is for our non-native collaborators, our non-native neighbors and non-native relatives. It's not a practice for, it's not a time for us to practice this guilt, putting blame. That's not what we're doing when we're unpacking historical trauma. Is we're learning from history. We're learning so that we don't repeat those same things in the future. We're learning how we got to where we are, because you're a part of this story. You're a part of the history. You're as well as a part of the solution. And as we move forward, so we invite you again to come in a good way and learn about histories. So again, we have to learn about that historical trauma. And what does that do historically, right? Those historical truths is it creates disproportionality for American and Alaska Native families. When we look at the data that we do have, when we look at these things, we see that there's American Indian and Alaska Native families have high rates of very negative things that we see throughout the different populations. American Indian Alaska Native families in 2016 had higher rates of prenatal substance exposure than any other ethnicity. And so these are the kind of things we start, the pathologies of all these things. We start seeing the symptoms, such as 66% of American and Alaska Native children removed from their families before turning a year old had prenatal alcohol or drug use as an identified condition of their removal. So acknowledging and understanding that a coping strategy that has been developed, that has been learned, an unhealthy way to cope and to survive that has been learned throughout generations is now impactful in causing our children to be taken away and removed from homes.
In 2018, over 42% of cases involving AI/AN children resulted in a termination of parental rights when parental alcohol or drug use stood as a condition of removal. Source: Strahan, A. E. et al., 2020. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 2019. Photo of a smiling child wrapped in a yellow cradle board.
The spirit that goes along with that alcohol or those substances, is traditionally understand it as it's a spirit. So it's a spirit as well, just as we have spirits as individuals. And when we invite that spirit into ourselves, our spirit moves out from us. And then we end up doing actions that we wouldn't normally do. And then, so we talk about this idea, this road of recovery where we're recovering. Well, that's when people push that bad spirit out and invite their spirit back in. They call their spirit back in to be centered. But it takes a while, right? Because your spirit has to get comfortable there again. And so that's that spiritual understanding. So when we're talking about working with our Indian people, our indigenous people, we recognize that traditionally there's some worldviews here that were once taken away, but we see that there's a lot of strengths within those worldviews, and we're going to get to those a little bit more. But again, there's a lot of different negative statistics that we could talk about and share. Trauma of removal. So some of the things that we see broadly is loss of culture, loss of connection to the community and its members, loss of connection to the land and a sense of home, inability to develop secure attachment, lack of foster placements or unstable placements.
Source: Newtown et al. 2000, Smith et al. 2001, Harvard University, Center on the Developing Child, 2007.
Supportive, responsive relationships early in life can prevent or reverse damaging effects of toxic stress. So we understand that relationships are healing. Relationships are one of those healing methods. And we found it traditionally, even within our traditional ways of being within our indigenous communities. You look at the way their tribes were structured. They were highly structured. They are highly structured. And one of the stereotypes is that, they're just, they don't know what they're doing. They're unorganized. They don't start on time. They, different things like that. But really, when you start unpacking and getting to know these tribal communities, the tribes are very highly structured with in their family structures and clanship structures, in how the tribes operate and how decisions are made. And so anyways, I would like to move on to our this again. We're still kind of understanding and trying to set the context for this idea of trauma and the impacts of trauma.
Effects of trauma. What are some effects of historical trauma on Native families? What are the effects of individual traumatic events on Native families? A photo of an iceberg. The white mound of ice above the water level is labeled observable behaviors. A larger portion of the iceberg is submerged below the water and is labeled underlying factors.
We recognize that I offer this image of the iceberg, right? And I think many of us have seen and used the image of the iceberg before, and recognizing that what we see is only the tip of the iceberg, right? Is what they say. And there's always underlining factors that we do not see. And so some of what we talked about when we go back to that historical trauma timeline and that unresolved grief, that is all underneath in the underlying factors. So when we're talking about collective healing, when we're talking about healing from historical trauma, we're talking about addressing these underlying factors. That's what we're trying to get to. So all right, our emerging attitudes. So I've been trying to get there. I think it's just been my spirit as I've been trying to talk, because I know in our slide deck, we present the, as we're understanding the context, we have to present the negative side of things, right? But I think the spirit in this collective healing is beginning to take momentum, and that carries our conversations in a different way. And so with that, now we begin to look at emerging attitudes. We begin to look at, okay, we're understanding how we got where we are. Where do we go from here? What do we know about ourselves and our communities that can help us? One of the things that we've learned as Indigenous people in helping ourselves and helping one another as good relatives is we recognize and acknowledge that, and we're learning that we can't always go outside to look for the help. The strengths and the wisdom lies within. It lies within the individuals, within the families, within the culture, within the community, and those community leaders. And we have to even reimagine how we think about community leader, right? And so some of the emerging attitudes is that the community heals the community. The community heals the community. And then we also have to have a belief that success is possible. A community's most valuable resource is their own people.
For example, parents, grandparents, youth, teachers, social services workers, mental health workers, spiritual leaders, judges, attorneys, law enforcement, researchers, tribal government, policymakers. Close brace. Tribal traditions and spiritual values provide a vital resource. Traditions and values must be renewed.
I always say, just an observation, I've been blessed to work with tribes and communities and developing programs for mental health and substance abuse and related issues. And we always talk about sustainability, right? Sustainability is always a priority. How do we sustain these programs? And then our sustainability conversations always go to looking at the funding. What other funding can we, or how can we align so that we can continue the funding to continue to flow in so that we can continue to have a program? Programs are great. Programs are great, but the ones that are going to be there after a program is gone is our community members, our families, our parents. And so we want to invest in our community members, in those community strengths. And that's where our sustainability comes from, when we engage our families, our community members, engage them in meaningful and purposeful ways. And so when we're talking about sustainability, I ask us to think, what are we sustaining? What behavior changes do we want to see sustained? What behavior changes do we want to see sustained? Because then the emphasis becomes on sustaining the behavior changes and the growth rather than sustaining a program. One thing that we learn with historical trauma, one consistency is inconsistency. I'm going to say it again. One consistency is inconsistency. And that's traumatic in itself. When there's inconsistency in a person's life, in their daily life, or even their community, when there's inconsistency, that's very traumatic. And we see that even within our helping programs, when they come and go, the grant's over. Maybe it's program is doing great and people are receiving some wonderful services and they're benefiting from it, but then in a year or two it's gone. And so we have to rethink how we're addressing and approaching sustainability.
Cultural strengths of the community. Native ideas into action.
We want to continue to do those, use those programs, invest in those programs, right? But we have to think about how we're investing and how we're investing in our communities. I want to take a moment here as we've kind of talked a little bit about some of the strengths and some of the opportunities and how we can look at things a little bit differently, I want to pause here, and I want to invite everyone to go into the chat box, and let's take a moment and think about protective factors or strengths that keep our community strong. What are some of those strengths that keep our community strong? So I'm going to turn to the chat box right now. I'm going to give you ask everyone, take a moment and start adding things that you might be aware of. I'm seeing things. I'm seeing family, ceremony, tradition. Thank you. Good. Yes. Safe housing, transparency. Yes, transparency. Connection and support, supportive relatives, cultural practices, traditions, family ties. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Fitness, family, connection to culture, ceremonies, mindfulness, mindedness, unity. Yes, churches, good. Have family night, social connection, engagement. Yeah. Teens, teen programs, custom culture. We can go on and on. Look at this list that we're creating right now, this list that we're generating. And we see the wonderful strengths that are in community, wonderful opportunities that are there. And I'm not even I just now at the very top of the list keeps growing and growing. Thank you so much for those gifts to one another. Humor, I love that. Yes, humor. Humor is a good way. That's medicine, right? It helps us feel better. So, all right. Continue to pour into the chat box as something comes to you, as something comes over your heart. Continue to pour into the chat box there. I'm going to move our attention over to our slide, Indigenous Worldview and Behavioral Health. So I love this quote from Dr. Fixico. For the present, the indigenous way of seeing things like traditional Indians is incongruent with the linear world of science.
Seminole Creek Tribes. Fixico, 2003.
The linear mind looks for cause and effect, but the Indian mind seeks to comprehend relationships. And so we begin, that's an introduction to begin looking at how we enter the space of behavioral health, or how we enter the space of taking care of one another and living in harmony, if you will, in community. It's a focus and emphasis on relationship. Again, going back to how we began and how we started, remembering that relationship is important. It's not just one aspect, it's a part of who we are, because we don't live in this life alone, right? We share space. So how do we share? So it's almost a relearning of how we share space together. I see our video is queued up. So I want to share a video at this time. And this short video, it's a quick 5-minute video of introduction to the systems of care. Many of you may have heard or be familiar with the systems of care or circles of care. I worked with some partners in creating this video, and we use it with communities when they're developing their system of care to help explain and to understand what a system of care is and what it could look like in their community. You know, when we looked at a lot of the materials that were available to understand system of care, they're very scholastic and a lot of words, and it's good material. But we wanted to create something that invoked a feeling, something that created conversation in the community. So our grandmas, our uncles, our young children can come together and see this and join in conversation and say, oh, I know what that is, and this is what it looks like here. So with that, I'm going to ask Sean to play our video as an introduction to systems of care in Indigenous communities.
Logos, Evergreen Training and Development and One Fire Associates. Introduction to System of Care. Evergreen Training. OneFireAssociates.org. Many AN communities contend that Native traditional beliefs and values about the care of children were the earliest versions of a quote system of care. Quote and ICWA, honoring innovations.
Tribal nations are diverse with many different structures.
Black and white photos of tribal leaders, tribal dwellings, a totem pole, and various tribal people.
Many have clans, bands, townships, rancherias, pueblos, and adoptions. For many, tribal nations have societies. Societies have been an important aspect of tribal life. They are groups of people within structures that are identified by their role in the community. Societies always serve a specific purpose. There are often behaviors and expectations in which they uphold. They work together and often operate as one unit. These groups keep our tribal ways going so we can be a strong community. Historical examples show us that there were many societies and some are still active today. There are warrior societies, peacekeeping societies, hunting, healing, social, and drum keepers, story keepers, fire keepers, societies to keep balance and harmony, and more. All societies have a purpose. All societies have values and principles that guide their actions to fulfill their purpose. We are grateful to some of the Lakota tribes who have begun to revive traditional societies as a way of providing care and support for the community's healing and wellness.
Color images of various landscapes. Horses run on a prairie.
The non-native world calls this a system of care. Many native communities understand system of care as a society of care. And like traditional societies, the system of care has values and principles to guide their actions. These values and principles are not new for tribes. The concepts are rooted within our worldviews, where everyone in the community is valued and works together for the common good. Let's first take a look at how system of care is defined, and then we can talk about what this looks like in tribal communities. A system of care is a coordinated and integrated teamwork approach. It is designed to help individuals who are at risk of mental health or other challenges. It helps them and their families live healthier lives at home, school, work, in their community, and throughout life.
Children dance and ceremonial dress.
There are 3 core values and 12 principles that ground a system of care. Family-driven and youth-guided means that the youth and families are equal partners in leading out their healing journey. This value is intended to empower the youth and family in their healing by putting their strengths and needs in the center and helping them make choices. They become a partner in determining what services and supports will be the right fit for them. After all, healing looks different for everyone. Like shoes,
Men sing and beat a drum.
may all do the same thing, but there are only a few that are the right fit. Culturally and linguistically competent is a value that says all organizations, programs, and services reflect the cultural differences and cultural strengths of the people they are working with. This means that the rules that govern the programs and the coordination of the program and services must be a meaningful and purposeful experience that reflects the youth and family's culture. For example, I am a Native youth and my grandparents are an important part of my life. They attend almost every function I am involved in. They should also be involved in any health and wellness plans I might have as well. The third value is that all programs, services, and supports are community-based. This means that services and supports should come from the community of the youth and family. It also means that the services and supports could come from trained professionals, but it could also come from cultural knowledge keepers within the community, like spiritual leaders or language speakers. Additionally, people who have lived experiences can also carry knowledge and wisdom. People like grandmas, grandpas, aunties, and uncles. People who really care about community members.
System of Care Framework infographic. At the center, a blue oval labeled Natural Helpers. This oval is surrounded by 8 smaller blue ovals labeled Juvenile Justice Services, Mental Health Services, Social Services, Educational Services, Health Services, Substance Abuse Services, Vocational Services, Recreational Services. Source: System of Care Framework from Strahl, B. and Friedman, R. 1986 Revised Edition. Graphics by Nick Birdshead.
And provide lots of support in the community. These are called natural helpers. In our societies, everyone has a role and are part of the solutions to the challenges we must overcome. By being community-based, it obviously creates a warm environment where youth and families are more likely to thrive. Some may say a structured, yet less restrictive environment. When many work together with one vision and mission, we are powerful like those traditional societies with meaning and purpose. When we coordinate and integrate services and support using these 3 core values.
Family-driven and youth-guided. Culturally linguistically competent. Community-based.
Our system of care will create paths to healing and wellness for youth, families, and our community today and for generations to come.
Thank you for bearing with us as we played the video. I saw some of the comments there. Yes, the child is a good reader. He was my son few years ago. He's 14 now. Now he's got a man voice, so can't get him through that anymore. But brief introduction to system of care and what it could look like within tribal communities.
The Systems of Care Framework again.
This framework here is just another example showing that all the different helping systems that may touch the lives of individuals and families and how we can coordinate and work together. And so building our systems of care in a coordinated and integrated way so that they are truly supportive of our families and individuals, as well as where it promotes that they are not only at the center, but they're leading in their own healing. And we try to set them up for success. So that's the intent of this idea of system of care. I have one more resource that I want to share with you. And to answer your question, one of the questions in here, yes, you can, we'll send the link out to that system of care video. It is on YouTube on my channel. So I want to share one more resource with you. This is called the Culture Forward Coalition, or the cultureforward.online is the website for the Culture Forward Coalition. Now, the Culture Forward Coalition is a group of people and organizations across Indian country where we're coming together, and I've been very blessed to help facilitate the coalition. And so we're pulling people together, groups and individuals that utilize and that use culture in their program planning to prevent suicide amongst Native youth. And so we're building out the website. It continues to grow. We're building out the coalition, but there's a lot of great things happening across Turtle Island in using cultural strengths and community in preventing suicide, but also not only preventing suicide and related risk factors, but promoting life and promoting life-affirming messaging using cultural strategies. And so we're trying to collect these and provide a platform and network across Turtle Island so that these approaches can have a network and really build and grow together as we do this work and reclaim the strengths of our communities and our traditions and our ways of knowing. So I encourage you to come visit our website, cultureforward.online. So, all right, well, that's wrap up that portion now. I want to ask Sean, if you can move us into our next portion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Courtney. And thank you again for unpacking and providing that grounding knowledge around historical trauma, those things that have happened, but then also the cultural resilience and how Alaskan, American Indian and Alaskan Native families are leveraging the value of community to help improve outcomes for their community members. So I want to then transition the conversation to, okay, the impacts of historical trauma. How do state systems, child welfare, healthcare, substance use treatment systems, how do we work together to improve outcomes for AI and AN families that have been affected by substance use. And this is where I want to again talk about two key tools that the National Center has just released that are specifically designed to equip systems in this space. And just as a reminder, man, no agency can do this alone, and it is integral. I cannot stress this enough. It is integral that state agencies collaborate with tribes across systems to improve outcomes for families. And one of the ways that they do that is through what we call the 5 points of intervention. And what we've noticed across our decades of work in this space, the National Center is there are 5 critical points in which state systems can collaborate with tribal organizations and tribal nations to improve outcomes and to implement practices and policies that work towards improving outcomes for AI and AN families affected by substance use.
An infographic. The 5 points of family intervention. 1. Pre-pregnancy. Prevent SUDs prior to pregnancy by promoting public awareness while encouraging equitable access to appropriate SUD and mental health treatments. 2. Prenatal. Identify substance use and mental health disorders through universal screening and assessment, engage pregnant people in effective treatment services, and provide ongoing services to support recovery. 3. Birth. Focus on identifying and meeting the needs of infants affected by prenatal substance exposure, withdrawal symptoms, and FASD, including the immediate need for bonding and attachment with a safe, stable, and consistent caregiver. 4. Neonatal, infancy, and postpartum. Ensure consistent access to a stable caregiver as well as a safe and supportive environment. Respond to infants' medical and developmental needs along with each family member's SUD and mental health issues. 5. Childhood and adolescence. Respond to the unique developmental and service needs of the toddler, preschooler, child, and adolescent prenatally exposed through a comprehensive, family-centered approach with a special focus on preventing SUDs among adolescents.
And we see here before you have those 5 points, be they pre-pregnancy, prenatal, birth, neonatal, infancy, and postpartum, as well as childhood and adolescence, that throughout these 5 points, there are focused things that state systems can do with tribal nations to improve outcomes for families, whether it's preventing SUDs prior to pregnancy, helping and working with tribal nations to implement policies and practices that support that. Again, and then other initiatives that you see here listed below. They're again designed to work collaboratively with tribal nations to improve outcomes. Because we know that, man, substance use disorder in and of itself, it's progressive. It is not linear. And that substance exposure is frequently not identified until the birth event. So again, how do we implement policies and practices in a collaborative fashion across those 5 points that will provide American Indian and Alaska Native families with the resources and tools and supports needed to support their recovery journey? And then we know that risk and protective factors change throughout those 5 points. And at the end of the day, man, multiple systems and tribal nations need to be involved and have a role in supporting these families. And so, again, without further ado, one of the things I'm super excited about today is to introduce to you these 2 resources that have been created with collaboration between the National Center and tribal policy experts and tribal organizations, specifically around 2 points of this 5 points of intervention.
System change opportunities at each point. 1. Pre-pregnancy. Indian Country Collaborative Values Inventory. 2. Prenatal. Prenatal Family Wellness Plans. 3. Birth. Team birth. 4. Neonatal, infancy, and postpartum. Sobriety treatment and recovery teams open brace start close brace. 5. Childhood and adolescence. ICWA Active Efforts Support Tool.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about that pre-pregnancy, the pre-pregnancy space and the Indian Country Collaborative Values Inventory, and then also the ICWA Active Efforts Support Tool that is really designed and really focused on that point of intervention around childhood and adolescence. So the purpose of the Indian Country CVI is to improve partnerships and services for families. And it does so. It is a tool that is used collaboratively across tribal nations and state systems to figure out what are those commonalities from a value standpoint that are in alignment between these collaborative partners, and to understand those differences and build upon the strengths so that ultimately a common goals and common principles are identified to help move the ball forward and build upon ways that lives can be changed. And so the creation of the Indian Country CVI was done so, again, the National Center collaborated with the Tribal Law and Policy Institute consultants, with research specialists, legal and child welfare specialists, to really create this tool, this resource that will help to identify those unique barriers when it comes to collaboration between Indian country and state systems. And again, the beauty of the ICCVI is that it can foster an understanding about the barriers that exist between tribally driven collaboratives and lead to more effective conversations and ultimately reduce barriers. Now, for time's sake, again, you're going to have access to these slides of after the webinar, but I want to give you an example. Here are some of the questions you see that are part of this Indian Country Collaborative Values Inventory. And again, they speak to different values and different beliefs when it comes to substance use. Again, so you see some examples there before you.
Example questions in the tool. Likert scale questions: open brace, strongly agree to strongly disagree, close brace. 1. Parents who do not want to participate in formal treatment should be allowed to explore other options. 2. Substance use treatment professionals involved with parents should have input in decisions about child safety, custody, and living arrangements. 3. Programs that provide methadone or other medication-assisted treatment, open brace, such as buprenorphine, close brace, for an opiate use disorder are just substituting one SUD for another. 4. Relapse should result in the child's immediate removal from that parent. 5. Historical trauma is a demonstrated risk factor for developing a substance use disorder. Example of ACVI report. Programs that provide methadone or other medication-assisted treatment are just substituting one addiction for another. A bar graph showing the data for percentage that disagree or strongly disagree, are neutral or unsure, or agree or strongly agree for categories such as child welfare, court, and maternal, child health.
And then what you see is kind of the results of it. Whenever a tribally driven collaborative walks through this CVI with state system partners, we're able to see some of the results that speak to areas where there may be strong disagreement. Maybe there's areas where there is alignment in values. And then the question is, how do we build upon those areas of alignment? And then how do we acknowledge those differences and still carve a path forward?
Findings from an ICCVI with a native urban provider.
And so, again, some of the strengths of this tool that we have, the Indian Country CVI, is that we see whenever we did this with a native urban provider and they walked through it, they identified strengths across this tribally driven collaborative. There were long-standing partnerships that they were able to leverage to implement policies and practices. There was good communication at the leadership levels, and then there was broad agreement on the importance of culturally grounded services and where to locate them. And then there were some opportunities that they identified as well, is that, man, in this specific instance, man, referrals were not flowing the way that they thought. There was constant turnover in staff with both state and tribal nations. And then there was less agreement about the challenges that are posed by historical trauma.
Other strengths. Understanding of history and its impact on Native families. Broad agreement on the challenges posed by structural bias and individual trauma. Other opportunities. Less understanding that Native children do better when raised by Native families.
So again, the question is, how do we identify, speak to those differences? And then how do we leverage, workforce development tools and to increase awareness and knowledge in that space? So again, I encourage you, we are super excited about the Indian Country CVI, and I encourage you again to reach out to the National Center if you would like to learn more about the CVI and how it can be used to help improve collaboration, understanding between tribal nations and state systems that are trying to figure out how do we come together to serve AIA and families that are affected by substance use. And then the second tool that we have, and this one is literally hot off the presses, is the ICWA Active Efforts Support Tool, or sometimes we call it IAST for short. And I always got to make sure that I pronounce that T as well. So the IAST, man, we are super excited about this tool. And again, this tool was developed like the way that the National Center operates in general is we want to bring together collaborative partners and experts in this space. This is not the National Center, creating a tool and in and of itself. Is we model that collaboration that we try to promote and enhance within across our nation. But I just want to take a moment first and just acknowledge the key contributors to this tool that I'm going to talk about.
Lummi Nation, Tribal Law and Policy Institute, Evergreen Training and Development, LLC.
First is Lummi Nation, and I cannot stress enough the work that the Lummi Nation has done really is the bedrock for the ICWA Active Efforts Support Tool. In fact, I want to specifically, give a huge thank you to the Lummi Nation's Child Welfare Manager, Robert Ludgate. And really, he created this document called the Lummi Nation Child Welfare Comprehensive Guide to Active Efforts. And I mean, it speaks to active efforts across multiple areas. And so what the National Center did is we talked with the Lummi Nation and got that approval to figure out how do we take that phenomenal work that they're doing and then look at that through the lens of the 5 points of intervention and create a resource that's specifically focused on AIA and families that are affected by substance use, and creating a resource that systems and will help collaboratives across the board figure out how do we implement active efforts in a meaningful way. And so again, the purpose of that tool, which again is just recently released, is it's really to provide local level child welfare, substance use treatment, and healthcare professionals with knowledge around the Indian Child Welfare Act, active efforts, and then really their role in a child welfare case that's requiring active efforts. And again, this is a tool that's really meant for the workforce. It is there for state systems to really understand how to implement active efforts. And it's a tool that helps them gauge if they're implementing active efforts, and maybe if not, what are some tools and resources and ways that they can implement active efforts, specifically for, again, AIA and families that are affected by substance use.
ICWA Active Efforts Support Toolkit products.
This toolkit itself is comprised of 3 key areas. There is a guidance document that is a part of this toolkit that really lays that foundational groundwork on first, what is ICWA? What is the Indian Child Welfare Act? And specifically, what are active efforts? Why are active efforts required? And then it lays the foundation for the second piece, which is the actual tool itself. That tool that child welfare partners can use as they work to implement active efforts for AIA and families that they're serving. And then the third piece is there are a set of learning modules. And those learning modules, as you can see in the slide, they cover 4 areas. There is an introduction to ICWA and active efforts, and then there's an introduction into the 5 points of intervention. So again, I briefly talked about it today, but I encourage you, check out this toolkit because that second module dives deeper into the 5 points and then how are active efforts implemented through the lens of the 5 points. And then the third module really talks about the role of those collaborative partners. I mean, as we know, when it comes to serving AIA and families that are affected by substance use and maybe involved in the state child welfare system, it is not a state child child welfare issue. This, to support families, it requires all collaborative partners, especially tribal nations, really leading the charge in that space, and then state systems coming alongside them to partner to improve outcomes. So that's really what Module 3 talks about. And then Module 4 is literally a walkthrough of the tool. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm a visual learner, so I need somebody to say, okay, walk me through this tool. How do I use it? So that's what Module 4 is specifically designed to do.
IEST tool example. Ideally, frontline child welfare staff will complete and review this tool monthly with their direct supervisors. Table 3. Prenatal goal. Identifying SUDs among pregnant individuals and helping them access effective treatment services. A series of yes or no questions.
And what you see before you, this is a sample from the tool itself. And again, it's designed so that maybe child welfare supervisors down with their frontline staff and really take a look and see in these specific areas, are we implementing active efforts? And if we're not, there are ways that the tool shows that active efforts could be implemented. And there's a ways, again, to use this almost as a review tool to support the child welfare workforce as they implement active efforts. But one of the other pieces that I would like to stress about this tool is that, yes, it can be used in multiple ways. It can be used by child welfare systems and collaborative partners that are seeking to improve how they implement active efforts.
Potential benefits of IAST for tribes and tribal nations. Communicate expectations of active efforts for AN families affected by substance use to state child welfare and judicial systems that have jurisdiction over a child dependency case. Self-assess to determine whether resources and supports provided by tribal social services are meeting or exceeding these guidelines. When the tribe intervenes on behalf of citizens who reside outside of tribal lands, conveys level of effort expectations to external courts and state agencies.
But this can also be used by tribal nations as a tool and a resource to help inform states on like, no, this is what active efforts looks like in this area, and to really support state systems and a means of equipping them with the knowledge and the resources on, again, in these cases, this is what active efforts looks like. So that's one of the beauties that I find in this tool and in the toolkit itself, is that it can be used in multiple areas. Again, both with child welfare systems and those collaborative partners, but then also with tribes to, again, help educate and to help bring awareness in those cases of exactly what active efforts could look like.
Indian Child Welfare Act Open Brace ICWA Close Brace Active Efforts Support Toolkit. Information from the toolkit helps professionals increase their understanding of ICWA, learn strategies to support American Indian and Alaskan Native AN families. Offers guidance and learning opportunities to promote the enhancement and innovations necessary to improve outcomes for AN families affected by substance use. Part 1. Guidance Document. Part 2. Tool. Part 3. Learning Modules. A QR code in the bottom left corner of the slide. Scan the QR code or click the link to access the series at https://ncf.hhs.gov/topics/American-Indian-Alaska-native/ICWA-active-efforts-series/.
And so what you see before you right now, this is an opportunity. You can scan that QR code with your camera. We'll put the link in the chat, but this is your opportunity. Again, this is a way to access the toolkit. This is kind of our splash page, if you will, that talks about a lot of the highlights of the toolkit. But I can't stress enough how excited we are to be able to release this toolkit, make it available to the workforce, make it available to tribes, so that ultimately we can figure out how do we come together to support AIA and families that are affected by substance use. And so again, if you didn't get a chance to scan that QR code with your camera, hey, don't worry about it. You're going to get a copy. You're going to get a copy of these slides afterwards, and you're going to get more opportunities to access this phenomenal resource as well. So what I would like to do is I'm looking at the time that we have left, and I know our time is limited today, but kind of like Courtney was saying, man, this is that initial foray into the discussion. And this is just kind of step one. And we hope as the National Center and through our work with collaboratively with tribal organizations, that this conversation can continue and that we can continue to figure out how do we leverage the phenomenal partnerships that exist between tribal organizations and system partners to improve outcomes for families. So, but I want to take a moment just to look. There have been multiple questions that have been submitted, and kind of like my colleague Somay was saying earlier, I mean, again, we had over 1,300 people register for this event. We have hundreds on, so we're not going to be able to get to every question live in the moment, but every single question will be answered after. But I want to take a look at a couple of questions that have come in and see if we can speak to those with some of the time we have. One question we have, and Courtney, I'd like to pose this to you, is what are some of the important things to remember whenever we're providing substance use services to AIAN communities?
Some of the important things to remember. Well, just acknowledging that again, it's the unresolved grief that they may be carrying, or that they are carrying, and they're using this substance to cope or to mask. You know, storytelling as an approach and helping label what that is you know, I don't want to get into like the treatment side of things, but acknowledging that that with many American Indian people, that indigenous people that have this understanding of nature, of in relationship, you know, that there's the mental health, the physical, emotional, spiritual. And so when we're working together and we're understanding that wow, some of this the spirit of this substance is making me do things, or we put a word to it, a label to it, it begins to empower the individual again, so that they can recognize, hey, I can do something about this, and that they're not just a bad person, right? Because we don't want them to believe that they're a bad person. That is one of those unhealthy beliefs that has been passed on, is that, oh, you're a bad person. You know, this anger that you're feeling makes you a bad person. This guilt that you're feeling makes you a bad person. So all of those, you know, we think about. We got to look at it in a more comprehensive way. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, that definitely helps. I appreciate it. Let's see. One of the other questions that came in is how can that tool, the ICWA Active Efforts Support Tool, how can it be used differently by tribal nations and state county systems whenever working with AIAN families? And so again, whenever the tool was designed in partnership with our tribal partners, we specifically want to design it so it can be used, again, both by state systems and by tribal organizations. So just to reiterate, again, one of the ways it can be used is by tribal nations having access to this tool and then using this tool as a resource whenever a AIAN family that's affected by substance use is involved in the child welfare system, and those active efforts are required to help inform the child welfare workforce, again, of what active efforts could look like. That's what I like about is it actually provides examples on, okay, in this situation, this is what active efforts looks like, or in this specific topic area, this is what active efforts looks like. So I really like that it provides clarity there, because again, that's one of the things that we know is very much needed in the workforce, is a resource that provides clarity and provides concrete examples. And so that's what I like that the IAS tool does. Again, man, we've had hundreds of questions come in, and definitely we are going to get to those up after the webinar. But what I would like to do, Courtney, is I would like to turn it over to you for a moment, to, as we kind of bring this initial conversation to a close, to maybe take 3 or 4 minutes and just talk to us a little bit about takeaways, and how we can both give and take away content and ideas from this discussion.
Thank you so much. thank you all for offering those questions, because that's what moves us forward, right? Is that spirit of questioning and wondering, a spirit of wonder, and together we'll seek some solutions forward. And I'm not going to say that we always know the answer, right? But we're going to find resources. We're going to work together, and that's the commitment, I think, that Sean and I have, and others on this webinar, and within this circle. And so that's my question to you in terms of takeaways. Anytime we gather, there's always gifts, right? So there's been a lot of gifts today. There's been and I always say, what do we do when we receive a gift, right? We use it. We're excited about it. We give thanks and we use it. So with those gifts, think about, what gifts are you receiving today? And then what gifts are you bringing, right? What gifts do you bring? And then thinking about that, what gifts you're receiving today and what gifts do you bring? What are you going to do with those? What are you going to do with those gifts moving forward, right? What are you going to do with those gifts moving forward? So that's how I'd like us to think about the takeaways, because there's a lot of things that we can focus on. I mean, there's toolkits, there's some great resources shared, hopefully some motivation. But I want you to think about that. What gifts did you receive? What gifts do you have to offer? And what are you going to do with them? So.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate that. And yes, I can't stress how important that is. And again, I love the fact that, again, multiple partners from across the world are a part of this conversation today, and processing through, what are we giving to this conversation? What are we giving to this ideal? But then also, what are some things that we can take away? And again, I will just tell you shamelessly, plug is, I hope one of the things you take away is, man, there are two phenomenal tools now that are available to you: the Indian Country Collaborative Values Inventory and the new ICWA Active Efforts Support Tool. On behalf of the National Center, I just want to express immense thanks to the Children's Bureau, to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, to the multiple tribal organizations that help to speak into this. Again, I cannot say enough specifically about Lummi Nation and just the groundbreaking work that they did that served as that cornerstone for the ICWA Active Efforts Support Tool. So again, a huge thank you to all of the many partners that came together to help produce these two phenomenal tools that, again, our hope is that will equip the workforce, both child welfare workforce, the healthcare workforce, tribal nations, their workforce as well, so that ultimately, how do we work together in a meaningful way to improve outcomes for AIA and families that are affected by substance use? Because that's one of the things, again, as I look at the great comments in the chat and I look at the questions that have been answered, man, there is a sense of urgency. I think there's a sense of urgency, and you as providers and as partners in this conversation understand that, man, there are families waiting right now to figure out, how do we collaborate better? Man, how can we use these tools so that we can really figure out, man, are we implementing active efforts? Are we doing it in a meaningful way to where we can support AIA and families that may be involved with the state child welfare system? And so equipping and providing those active efforts so that we can support them, and so that reunification, if that's required, can happen as rapidly as possible. So again, I can't say thank you enough to all the providers that have invested their time, have invested their talent to figure out what tools can we put together to continue this conversation. So again, just a huge thank you to our federal partners, to the tribal nations that have been a part of this conversation, to our state, local community partners as well, for being a part of this. And so then I will turn it back over to Somay for some closing instructions.
Audience survey QR code. Thank you for joining us today. See the end of the presentation for additional resources.
Sure, thanks, Sean. We'll just leave this slide up for a couple minutes. To contact the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare, you can scan this QR code. And you can also visit our website. Link is over there. We can pop those into the chat as well. And then there's our website. And then we also have a toll-free phone number.
Contact the NCS-ACW Training and Technical Assistance Program. Connect with programs that are developing tools and implementing practices and protocols to support their collaborative training and technical assistance to support collaboration and systems change. QR code on right side of the slide. Contact us. https://ncsacw.acf.hhs.gov/ ncsacw@cffutures.org. Toll free at 1-866-493-2758.
So we can just leave this up, and thank you for joining us.